Hello, Alvin ISD students. In this video, we're going to discuss Pythagorean theorem. Don't forget, you're going to need paper, a notebook, or writing utensil, just something to take notes on during this lesson. Let's start. Which one doesn't belong? In your notebook, select which one of the following, A, B, C, or D, which one of those doesn't belong, and explain why. Pause the video. Alright, hopefully you've recorded your selection. Any of these answer choices could have worked. I could say that the circle doesn't belong because it's the only one that's not an actual polygon. Any answer could work. You just have to explain your thinking. Oh no, you're locked out of your house and the only open window is on the second floor, 20 feet above the ground. You need to borrow a ladder from one of your neighbors. There are bushes along the front of the house, so the ladder will have to be placed 15 feet away from the house. What is the length of the ladder you will need to borrow in order to reach the window? This type of question or problem are the things that we're going to look at talking about today. So, what are we learning today? I will be able to find missing measures and solve problems using Pythagorean theorem. I will be able to write about Pythagorean theorem using a problem situation. Pythagorean theorem. So we're going to cover three topics within Pythagorean theorem. We're going to talk about the model, find a length, and determine if a triangle has a right angle. In other words, we're going to determine if it is a right triangle. Okay, so to start, I've got a triangle. It has a right angle. One of the sides is 3 units and one of the sides is 4 units. Now the two sides that we just discussed, the 3 and the 4, those form the right angle, which we call those side legs. So this is leg with a length of 4 and this is a leg with a length of 3. Now, the long side that's directly across from the right angle, that's called the hypotenuse. Well, years ago, mathematicians noticed a specific pattern. They noticed that if they took the side length and squared it to literally form a square on both of the legs, so the square of this one would be 9. So this square has an area of 9. I know it's not lined up very nicely, but it did at one point. And this area, 4 times 4, so this one had a square, or the area of this square was 16. Well, mathematicians noticed that when they added these numbers, so 16 plus 9, they would get that area was the same as the area of the hypotenuse, or the square formed by the hypotenuse, excuse me. So this area was 25. So whenever they did that, they noticed, well, if I found the square root, if I know that the square of this, so this is 4 times 4, so this is a square with a length of 4 and a width of 4. That tells me that the side of this triangle was a 4. If the square formed by this, by the base of it, was 9, that means that each side was 3. If I knew the area of the hypotenuse of square was 25, what number times itself, because it's a square, would be 25? Well, that told them the square root of 25 is 5. So they knew that the length of the hypotenuse would be 5 units. After doing this multiple times, mathematicians came up with a theorem. It's called the Pythagorean theorem. Pythagoras, while not the first person to ever find it, is the person that made it famous and actually wrote about it. So in this, he's got a squared plus b squared equals c squared. All that's saying is that the length of this side, when I make it a square, plus the square of the other leg is equal to, whenever I add them together, their sum is equal to the square of the hypotenuse's side. Notice in this one, in this example, they don't always call the sides A, B, or C. Sometimes it's F, G, and H. They can put any variables they would like to. In this case, we just have to make sure that we know the hypotenuse is directly across from the right angle. So the square of this leg plus the square of this leg is equal to the square of the hypotenuse. So let's use Pythagorean theorem to find the distance between the school and this point across the hypotenuse. So I know that I could go 6 blocks and then turn left and go 8 blocks. What's the distance that I am now from the school? So the first thing I would do is start off with my Pythagorean theorem. I'm going to go ahead and use a squared plus b squared equals c squared, even though I know that it's just leg squared plus leg squared equals hypotenuse squared. Now I'm going to substitute in my values. I chose to use 6 as a because it doesn't really matter, it's just a leg. So 6 squared plus 8 squared equals x squared. I went ahead and used an x because I don't know what that value is. Once I square my numbers, I know that 6 squared is 36, 8 squared is 64, so 36 plus 64 equals x squared. Combine like terms, and that tells me 100 is equal to x squared. Well, if I'll remember, that's not telling me what the length of this is. That's not telling me the distance that it is from the school to where I am now. That's the square that was formed from that side. So I still need to take the square root in order to find that distance. Whenever I do that, I find out the distance from this spot to the school was 10 blocks. Make sure you write it down. In the last example, we looked at finding the missing measure when it was the length of the hypotenuse. But we don't always need or have to find the length of the hypotenuse. Sometimes they'll give us the length of the hypotenuse and we've got to find one of the legs. So we can use the same exact theorem. We just write it down, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. I know that a is going to be 8 and c is going to be 20. I know that c is 20 because it's directly across from that right angle. Typically, I will draw an arrow to show that. Directly across from that right angle. All right, so then I substitute in my numbers. So I've got 8 squared plus b squared, since that's my unknown, equals 20 squared. So 64 plus b squared equals 400. Subtract 64 from both sides, and I get b squared equals 336. Now remember, that's the area of that square that was formed. So in order to find the length of this side, or b, I have to take the square root. Whenever I do that, I can put that into my calculator, and I find that the square root of 336 is approximately 18.33. Make sure to write down this example in your notes. Now the Pythagorean theorem doesn't just need to be used to find the lengths of the sides of a right triangle. I can also use it to determine if a triangle is a right triangle. In other words, does it have a right angle? Well, if you notice on the other ones, the hypotenuse was always the longest side. So if this is a right triangle, that would be my hypotenuse. That would be my C. So I would substitute it in, and I'm looking to see, does 6 squared plus 8 squared, does that equal 10 squared? Well, 36 plus 64, is that equal to 100? It is. In that case, it's a right triangle. Let's try with this example. Again, the longest side is the hypotenuse. So that is my 12. So I would substitute it in. 4 squared plus 9 squared, does that equal 12 squared? Well, 4 squared is 16, 9 squared is 81, and 12 squared is 144. So does 16 plus 81, is that equal to 144? No. 16 plus 81 is 97, and 97 does not equal 144. So this is not a right triangle. Now it's your turn. Pause the video and see if you can determine the length of the hypotenuse. Okay, hopefully you've paused the video and you've worked through it on your own. Now we're going to go through and check. So the first thing I would do is identify what is the hypotenuse, or what is the C in this case. So the hypotenuse is directly across from the right angle. So when I go to substitute in my values, I would say 5 squared plus 12 squared equals C squared. Or 25 plus 144 equals C squared. Well, 25 plus 144 is 169. So 169 equals C squared. Again, that's the square. That's the area of that square, but I'm not asking for the square. I want to know the length of the hypotenuse. So I've got to take the square root. When I take the square root of both sides, I get that 13 is equal to C. Did you get it correct? Did you say that the hypotenuse was 13 units? All right, your turn again. Pause the video and try to find the length of the leg. All right, let's see if you got it correct. First thing I would do is identify the hypotenuse. All right, that is the formula I'm going to use for my Pythagorean theorem. Then I would substitute in my values. This time I selected 24 to be B. So I have A squared plus 24 squared equals 25 squared. Well, A squared, whenever I square 24, A squared plus 576 is equal to 625. Now I've got to do the inverse operation to try to get my variable by itself. So I'm going to subtract 576 from both sides and end up with A squared equals 49. Again, that's the area of the square, not the length of the side or the length of the leg. So I've got to take the square root to find out that the length of that side, or the length of that leg of this right triangle, is 7 units. Did you get it correct? Here's one more. Determine if the figure shown is a right triangle. Pause the video to determine if this triangle is in fact a right triangle. All right, let's see if you got it correct. First thing I would do is identify which one would be my hypotenuse. Well, I know the longest length would be the hypotenuse because it's always the longest side, which would mean this would be my right angle. So we're going to act as if it is. So if that was my right angle, that means that 5 squared plus 11 squared should be equal to 13 squared. So when I square my numbers, 25 plus 121, I'm trying to find out, does that equal 169? 146. I get 146 equals 169. That is not true. So since this statement, 146 equals 169, is not true, that means that this figure is not a right triangle. Did you get it correct? Let's go back to that original problem. Now that you know about Pythagorean theorem, in your notebook, explain how you would determine the length of the ladder needed to reach the window. Pause the video and work the problem in your notebook. Don't forget, after you've worked your problem, you've got to explain how you would determine that length. Have a good day.